Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My name is Father Alex. I am the host, and I'm also the vicar of St. Matthew's Church in Burnley, and I'm also the author of Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a priest story, which is out now, and you can find that online and in all good bookshops. My guest today on the Godcast is Trey Hall. Trey is the director of mission and evangelism within the Methodist Church. He's also a regular contributor to Zoe Ball's Breakfast Show, where he presents a thought for the day on a frequent basis. And he is also the host of the podcast Hope and Anchor, which I've actually been a guest on, and I'll put a link on to this interview. So enjoy this interview now with Trey Hall. I hope you enjoy it. Well, Trey, it's wonderful to welcome you to the Godcast today. How are you?
I'm really, really good. It's great to see you, Alex.
Where's home for you, Trey?
I live in far north suburban London, sort of end of the Piccadilly line for folks who
Okay.
know London. So Oakwood, just a little walk north of Southgate in North London.
So people who are picking this up or picking you up for the first time or hearing your dulcet tones will immediately recognize that's not a London accent you've got
It's
going
not
on
a North
there.
London. It's not a North London accent at all, is it?
So tell us
It's
about the origins of Trey Hall.
it's a West. I love origin stories. It's a West Tennessee accent. So I'm from Memphis, which is the southwest corner of Tennessee in the South. Raised in the South, born in 1975. Stayed in the South till I went to. I stayed in South for uni and theology school, and then moved to Chicago, where mostly had my kind of ministry. I'm a Methodist minister, and had most of my ministry there in Chicago as a pastor of churches in the city, and then also as a church planter or pioneer, as sometimes it's called over here in the UK. And then my husband is British. We met in London way back in our 20s, and dated long distance for a while. Then he eventually moved to Chicago. We got married there. But his job, he's a theological educator. He's an academic theologian, and so he got a job teaching in Birmingham about 9 years ago. And so we moved from Chicago to Birmingham. I'd never been to Birmingham before. Landed there and just loved it. But then about 5 years ago, I started working for the Methodist Church at Church House, which is sort of like the one place of the leadership of Methodism. That's a potted history of Trey, at least professionally.
Was it easy to move to the UK? Was it a difficult transition for you?
Because I lived here, I did live here for a year when I was in my early mid-20s for an internship. And so I always loved the UK. And then, of course, marrying a Brit, I was here kind of every year visiting family. So culturally, it wasn't a big deal because I was, knew the culture. I think there's always a sense for anybody who leaves their home land or home country. There's always going to be an essential, at least in my experience, an essential homesickness that changes as you get enculturated in the new place, but never really goes away. So I love Britain. I love British people. I love the people who live in Britain who aren't British, immigrants, migrants. But I will always have a place in my heart for the States, and who knows, maybe we'll move back there again one day. The problem with the transatlantic couple, a married couple, is one of us is always going to be homesick for the other. Wherever we live, one partner is going to be homesick. So we're in a little bit of a conundrum, but
Yeah.
I'm good. I love Britain, and I get home enough to the States to get my fix of, all things fried and too salted, and all the things I miss culinary wise.
Trey, you've identified that your partner is a man. So people may again be discovering for the first time that you're a gay man. Can I ask how you find that experience of being a gay Christian different in the UK to perhaps in America? Are there differences?
A good question. I don't know that I would. I came out when I was at uni in the mid 90s, and I came out because I am gay. That's what that's the foundational reality, is like eventually I had something to come out about. again, it's been almost 30 years now. But one of the things that helped me come out was I had become part of a Christian ministry, an ecumenical Christian ministry, which means many different Christian traditions together. And I'd become part of that and gotten really, really serious about my faith. I hadn't been raised in a really church-going family. I had some intersection with the church in high school, but at uni was where I got really serious about my faith and claimed Jesus as my, to use AA language. I'm also a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Jesus is my higher power, and became part of the church in a formal way, and committed myself to following Jesus and to becoming a minister. But it was because of that experience, both a direct experience of grace and an experience of spiritual assurance in me, that I was loved beyond belief by God, and the experience of a community of disciples, of followers who were very, very kind of diverse. I would say that it was unusual in the mid-90s in Tennessee at this big state school for all these folks, liberals, conservatives, people who were exploring Christianity for the first time. And so I came into my adulthood in that kind of community, and that community really helped me come out of the closet. So a lot of folks, and this is a true story too, a lot of folks who were raised in organized religion, I hope this is happening less and less, but in my generation, certainly, and generations before, would come out of the closet, might be people of faith, come out of the closet and have experiences of feeling marginalized, excluded, and not just feeling marginalized and excluded, but being marginalized and excluded, and so would feel for their own health or journey they need to leave that organized religion, which is a deep, deep, deep sadness and grief, and and anger for me in a holy way, I hope. But my story, thanks be to all the things, fortune and luck and maybe God, though it's hard for me to see God sort of saying, Trey, it's going to be good for you, but bad for all these other LGBTQ people. But through some mix of whatever, I'm really grateful that my experience of Christian community helped me come out of the closet. So that was so pivotal. And I have to say, the States in the 90s, in the 80s, 90s, and even up to the 2000s, even now still to some degree, is in a culture war, at least within the church and other organized religions around LGBTQ folks. I think that's less of a thing here in Britain. It's still a thing here, obviously, in some traditions more than others, but it's certainly still a thing here. The difference is, I think in the States, the general population, the general society is still, it's definitely more open, but there's still some polarization there around sexuality, gender identity. Here, I think that's a reality, but I think society at large is much less divided on that. The church has still struggled with it, understandably, but I think here, I have neighbors of all kinds of political persuasions, religious and not, who know that Jonathan and I are a couple on the street and just treat us like a normal couple, which is lovely. So I think it's a little better here.
And you hold this quite senior role within the Methodist Church, Trey, don't you? Director of Mission and Evangelism. That's right. Is that right?
I'm the director of Evangelism and Growth. My boss is the head of mission, so
Okay.
she's fabulous. But yeah, I'm the director of Evangelism and Growth. So, but it is a I guess I say it's a middle senior level. I have a lot of responsibility for working with people across the church in areas like evangelism, starting new churches, pioneering discipleship and spirituality, digital ministry, church growth, church change, transformational leadership. I always say it's all the good stuff, really. It's the internal stuff around our own discipleship and spirituality. It's the community engagement stuff, and it's the making the church a healthier place stuff. So it's great. So I do have a serious role in the church.
Yeah, and do you see that role beyond the Methodist Church? I mean, I'm just thinking about my own role. I'm on General Synod in the Church of England, and we've got these raging debates about blessing of gay relationships and things. And of course, the Methodist Church has taken that step, not just to pray and bless weddings, but to affirm same-sex relationships. What's your perspective when you look across at the Church of England, Trey? Because our churches are quite united in many ways, aren't they? We do lots of ecumenical stuff together. What do you feel? And because I think you're quite an inspirational figure to, particularly to the LGBTQ plus I community, who are looking for encouragement and supporters and hope. There's quite a lot there, but what's your thoughts?
Well, I would never, I'm deeply committed to ecumenism, to ecumenical relationships, and have those relationships personally and professionally, representatively across many, many traditions. And I have a deep respect for, a sincere respect that every church, whilst we're united in Christ and a common mission in many, many ways, but that we do find ourselves a lot in different circumstances. And so I would never, while my longing is, of course, that the Church of Jesus Christ across the world would continue being a church because of the gospel that is more inclusive, more committed to justice, more committed to helping loads more people claim and know and experience the grace of Jesus Christ and love of God. Those are the things I'm really, really passionate about. But I know from my own experience in the Methodist Church that change takes time, lots of care and prayer. And so that's my longing, for the whole church of Jesus Christ, Anglicans, Baptists, Roman Catholics, and not just around LGBTQ issues, but issues, all kinds of they're not even issues, are they? Questions of human life around economic marginalization, around migration and immigration. So my own experience as a gay man I'm so grateful to be gay. I'm so grateful that God made me gay. I'm so grateful that I'm a recovering alcoholic, because in those experiences I've come to, I feel like I've been given a little bit more of a lens of what it's like to, um, I don't want to say be excluded, because I think that's part of the reality, but a lens of being seen sometimes as a problem in an institution that I really love. And so my own journey is that as a gay man, is that my experience is caught up with loads of other folks, straight, gay, cisgendered, transgendered, people of every ethnicity and race, abled and disabled, neurodiversity, that we are all caught up, I believe, in this wonderful, beautiful thing called the kingdom of God, and that more will be revealed the longer we're able to sort of stay open to God and open to each other across difference. So I would never want to tell the C of E what to do, to answer your question, because I know that people of good conscience are wrestling with it. I'm really proud that the Methodist Church in Britain, not all around the world yet, but the Methodist Church in Britain has said, we believe that, and they've said this for a long time, that the ministry of gay and lesbian people, this is language from the 90s, before we started using language around bisexuality and trans language, but that from the 90s they celebrated the ministry of of lesbian and gay people, whilst also trying to wrestle with folks who couldn't affirm that. And so I think the Methodist Church has been its own holy wrestling and holy conferencing for a long time. Even now, you reference this decision that the Methodist Church is now not just blessing or praying for LGBTQIA folk, but ordination, marriage is all celebrated. And I think that is true in a general sense. But of course, there are some churches that will be making decisions and discerning who will not, choose to marry folks of the same gender in their churches. So we're a church that's connectional. That is, we're a church that sort of has some shared mission priorities, but there's still a lot of diversity in the Methodist Church too. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, but there are parallels, aren't there? And and the Methodist Church takes position that if people don't want to bless, affirm, marry gay couples, then they don't have to. What's been the response from the more conservative side of the Methodist Church in England, Trey? Has there been a way of kind of the word settlement has been used in the Church of England recently? Does the tension sit quite nicely at the moment, or is there still a raging debate within the Methodist Church?
I mean, labels are always helpful and unhelpful. So I think conservative is not a language I would use. I know what you mean, but I think there are people who are theologically conservative or theologically more traditional or theologically progressive who are really supportive of celebrating the marriages of LGBTQ folks, and that there are folks, who aren't. I think there have been a few churches, this is public, that have left and decided to go independent or join other fellowships, and that's a place. Whilst I lament that and really do grieve, I'm someone who believes that we can hold together and seek justice, gospel justice. But there are a few churches that have left. We haven't seen a major split. To be honest, people are hanging in, and I think one of the ways we've been able to hold together is by really saying something really clearly. The Methodist Church allows, XYZ. It's not just LGBTQ inclusion, whilst also preserving reverencing the local expression and the discernment of each church and congregation. I think that's a potentially helpful middle way. Via Medea, the Anglicans want to claim that, right? A middle way of holding together. That seems to be working for the Methodist Church right now. I would not want to read that on to the Anglican Communion or the C of E, because again, I don't know that context, and I couldn't make any assumptions about that. But it's working for the Methodist Church in Britain right now. I was at a conference last weekend, 2 weekends ago. We had a big evangelism mission conference, and it was so beautiful because we had a beautiful experience of all kinds of different theologies sort of holding together. We made a decision at that conference not to try to sort of sand down our discourse into one sort of common denominator. We'll only refer to God in this way, but we sort of let the room be. And there are 250 people in dialogue, praising God. And it was just wonderful to look out over that crowd, over that congregation, if you will, and to see people that I know are really struggle with, celebrating marriage, for example, of LGBTQ folks who were there on a spiritual journey in Christ together, they were there. And then I know people, I could look across the room and see, women and men and non-binary folks who had been really wounded by their experience of church, and they were there too. And I don't mean that in a sense like it's all okay, we're all together, so justice doesn't matter or inclusion doesn't matter. But I mean, there was a sense of, from our own location, from our own place, those folks were there and trying to come together for common mission, whilst also saying, this is who we are. And I think that's a pretty healthy way of moving into conflictual situations. It's really, I think it's really mature. I also want to say, I do, really at the end of the day, respect people's consciences, and I think that's so important that, at the end of the day, the individual conscience, the personal conscience, and the discerned conscience of the body, the congregation, so important. I've known lots of LGBTQ folks who, for their own sanity and health and well-being, have had to leave church experiences because of and I don't like to use really hyped language, but I in this case, I just know their stories so well from years of pastoring LGBTQ folks, the trauma and abuse that they experienced in some Christian contexts, and they needed to leave, And then there's the whole swathe of folks who experience maybe not abuse or trauma, but just being ignored, not being acknowledged, not being known deeply. And that's not as deep a cut, but it's just as painful over time. So I do lament that is the reality. And I long, at the end of the day, people say, what do you think about the Church of Jesus Christ? And in terms of LGBT, inclusion, and the people who may be against that. And I say with great humility, as someone whose mind and life has been changed on a whole bunch of things outside of LGBTQ questions, I have been changed. I have been, I have seen my own complicity in structures that have been unhelpful and unhealthy for people. So my longing is that I pray for the conversion of people who don't think that LGBTQ folks should be celebrated or leaders in the church. I do pray for their conversion. I want to be honest about that. I pray for their conversion, but that's God's work and their work and not mine.
Well, amen to that, Trey. Most certainly from my perspective. Trey, you mentioned a few minutes ago your connection with Alcoholics Anonymous, and you said that you were proud that you could speak about that. Are you happy to share with you the story of that? I'm a Christian man.
Sure.
Just tell our listeners and watchers about that if you would.
Happy to. Just to say at the outset, like my experience of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think there are lots of different ways to get sober. If you're struggling with an addiction, if people who are listening or watching are struggling with addiction of any kind, a substance, a process, a behavior, there are loads of ways to get sober or clean. For me, AA really worked. So I just want to say that. I loved when I went to uni. I was a really, really shy, nerdy kid growing up, and I sort of really kind of reflective, tender-hearted, gentle, deeply, deeply shy. Though I could perform and I could, whatever, but I was just deeply insecure. And some of that insecurity was, I think, being closeted growing up. And that's one of the, just for people who are watching, being a closeted kid going through puberty is so painful, because you don't have this like, you can't develop in the way that kids who are able to sort of be expressive and safe about their expression. There's all this kind of deep, it's a horrible experience. Anyway, when I went to uni, and
that still touches you, Trey, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, and it does. I can see that young Trey, and I just long, like, I wish for all kids that they could discern, like, learn about themselves as people who are wholeheartedly beautiful and sexual, and sexuality is a gift from God, and like to be able to hold. I just think I never got to hold a boy's hand growing up in the way that lots of my straight friends got to hold hands and learn how to hug and kiss and to sort of navigate their own lives. So yeah, I do feel that pain. But when I went to uni, I said I became seriously committed to Christianity. I came out, and I also discovered alcohol, which was fabulous. I mean, it's like, it really helped me move, I say, from the being a wallflower at parties onto the center of the dance floor. And alcohol really helped me. I have to say that. Like, I don't think I drank necessarily in an alcoholic way at uni, maybe a little bit towards the end, but it became an elixir of freedom. Like, it helped me, it changed the way I felt. And that's why I drank, because it changed the way I felt, and it helped me be more outgoing and sociable. And in some ways, I'm really grateful to alcohol for the courage it gave me in those early years to help me sort of come out of my own shell and to be comfortable in my own skin and to talk to boys, which I hadn't learned to do as a closeted kid. So I remember, like, the first time I kissed a boy on a dance floor, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know that I would have done that if all the movies, all the teen movies of like the lean in for the kiss at the prom or whatever, like that never happened to me. So like leaning in at uni on a dance floor and kissing a boy was like, if I hadn't had a couple of beers beforehand, I don't know if I would have done that. So thank God for alcohol, right? But the short story is that it's a long story, but the short version of it is eventually alcohol stopped working for me in that way. It became not something that freed me up or made me courageous. It's something that did the very opposite. It turned against me to sort of personify it. And for the first few years of drinking, it brought me into relationship, into community. Eventually, became a really enchaining, locking thing that brought me into a sort of exclusion in my house, isolation. I was just drinking alone. And my drinking mostly happened alone. I might have a couple drinks with some friends after work or after a meeting, and then end up in my flat on the back balcony drinking too much wine and smoking too many cigarettes, which is to say any more than one cigarette's too many, but wishing it would stop. And that happened. That was happened for years. And I had a lot of shame because I was a pastor, and I couldn't stop. I tried to stop drinking for this is back years ago now, but like before they had dry January. But like I tried to stop drinking for January, for New Year, for Lent, and I could stop for a few days or maybe a month, but I could never stay stopped. My problem wasn't stopping drinking, as we say in AA. My problem was staying stopped. Most people can stop for a couple days, but I could never stay stopped. And I went to AA because I was actually, to be honest with you, I was writing a sermon. We were doing a sermon series at the church I was pastor of on addictions and grace. And I thought I might do some research, for this sermon. And I went to this AA meeting, and I thought I was going to find like a group of miserables, people who were whining and whinging and complaining and blaming other people for their problems. But what I found in that room was just deep joy and honesty, and people telling the truth about what had happened to them, and telling the truth in detail, but also not like mired by it. There was also this kind of freedom pulsing through the room, and I just cried. I'm not a real crier. I wish I could cry more, but in that room, I remember crying and hearing these testimonies. It was a big meeting. There's probably 100, 200 people there. But I went back out, and though I'd been touched by that, I wasn't ready to give up yet. So it was a couple more years. In my early 30s, I came into the program, and what works for me about AA is there is a real, somewhat simple, but still quite sophisticated understanding of how addiction works, which is that there is a mental obsession, which I identify with. Right, when I wasn't drinking, I was thinking about drinking, and when am I going to get my next drink? And I might be able to hold off to the end of the day, or to the holiday, or to the weekend, but I was thinking about it. I was obsessed with it. And from the moment then I put the alcohol in my body, there was like this chain reaction that happened. I couldn't stop. So this mental obsession, oh, I've got to have a drink. And then once I started to drink, who knows where it would go. Sometimes I could stop after a few, but most of the times it would turn into this. And then also AA is really clear about a spiritual malady, is how we talk about it. So the drinking, or whatever the addiction that people have, is just a symptom of a deeper problem. And that was really sophisticated. So like, yeah, the alcohol is your kind of is your problem, but your deep problem is like spiritual dis-ease, spiritual discontentedness. And so AA is a spiritual program, and you can only, by AA, you can only get healthy, you can only get sober and stay sober by working this, basically it's called the 12 steps, which is a process of spiritual transformation. And I love it. It's very simple, it's very straightforward. It requires some work on our parts, but it's also divinely inspired. And I think the thing, I'll stop now, the two things that I love about AA: one, I experienced the miracle of not drinking. That's been almost 15 years. Not only have I not had a drink in 15 years, I have not wanted to drink. So I experienced a healing of I don't desire to drink anymore. I could, if you came to my house, Alex, I'd mix you a martini and have no desire to drink it. It doesn't have that hold on me. So that I celebrate that miracle. Yeah. I used to be suspicious of miracles, like skeptical, but I believe in them. Yeah. And the second thing is I love about AA is that it's people across the spiritual spectrum: agnostics, atheists, people of many religions and none, spiritual but not religious people, who are experiencing something that is not themselves changing them. And people talk about their higher power in really different ways, but I don't know another place, I've never experienced another place in this entire world where people get together who have a problem, have a challenge, and are finding life, who have very, very different theologies and very different experiences or encounters of their higher power, but are together. It is joy. When I meet in that room with those folks, I've got lots of meetings a week, I feel, to use Christian language, I feel, and I mean it, I feel it. I feel the Holy Spirit blow through. Something changes when we come together and get real.
Yeah. Well, I've completely diverted from my questions, as I normally do, Trey, but I think this is an important subject, and I just want to kind of finish just a little bit about addiction. I interviewed Chris Difford, the guy from Squeeze, who said that he had to find out where his rock bottom was, and it was only when he found his rock bottom and fell to his knees that he could find a way back up. What was your spiritual rock bottom? Because some people may be surprised to hear that you were a pastor and you were drinking, you were a Christian, you were drinking. What was the spiritual rock bottom in all that for you?
I think the rock bottom is helpful language. That just means the place where you accept that you can't nothing in your power will help you. That's what a rock bottom is. Just for those who are listening, it's the place where you accept that I can't do this by myself. And some people have really dramatic rock bottoms. Like they find themselves, they wake up in someone else's bed in a different country. They're like, oh shit. I don't know if we can cuss on the crap, whatever. Like this is my bottom. Lots of other folks I know in the program of AA have much more ordinary rock bottoms, and that was definitely my case. It was a series of months, really, of just, as we say in the program, just finally realizing I'm so sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I can't do this anymore. For me, it was really I had stopped drinking for about 3 months on my own steam. I was what we call white knuckling. I was like, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. And I did that for 3 months. Mind you, I was like exercising compulsively, chain smoking at the same time. So like it's a cross addiction. So like I wasn't drinking, but I was smoking 3 packs of marbles a day and running like a half marathon every day. So like some real addictive stuff going on there, like compulsive energy. And then I was going to run a half marathon, and I got on the way to pick up my race bib for the race the next day. This is in Chicago. I was cycling to the Navy Pier to get my race bib, and I got knocked off my bike by a car. And I wasn't injured terribly, but I did have an injury in my leg that made it impossible for me to run the next day. And as soon as I got home that night, having been injured, I opened a bottle of wine and drank. And I drank for another couple of weeks. And then one day I woke up and I was just like, it was a Saturday morning, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I've had enough. So for me, it wasn't dramatic. It was just sort of the accrual of lots and lots of hungover mornings, and just finally at the age of 33 saying, I mean, to use really salty language, this is Anne Lamott's language. Fuck it. Help me, Jesus. I can't do this by myself. And I think that kind of like, fuck it, was a sense of like, I can't do this by myself. That was my bottom. So it's not very dramatic. It's not a great story. When I would tell the story of my bottom in AA meetings, when I gave my first lead, your first lead or your first chair is when you tell your story in AA. It's based on testimony. It's basically all you hear is like experience, strength, and hope. What happened and what do you like now? And when I told my story the first time, there was it's in Chicago, this little Irish lady called, well, I'll call her Rhoda. And she was like, when I described that as my bottom, my rock bottom, she's like, that's your bottom? Because it's not dramatic. But no. I think lots of folks who have addictive problems don't have dramatic stories. They just have
I think that's a really important thing to recognize, Trey. And I've had numerous people who've had addiction problems on the Godcast, and just to bring this section to a close, we're running out of time, but people who might just be one person watching this with a very undramatic addiction, that kind of goes under the radar. Well, what would you say to that person who might be tuned in and watching this and thinking, gosh, that's me?
Exactly. If you think you have a problem, you probably do, is what I'd say. Like if it's something you've thought about before, you might want to investigate that. And I would say, as a member of AA, get to an AA meeting, and that's what I'd say. And there are AA meetings in every place in this whole country. You can go online, find a meeting, get to a meeting, which may be the scariest thing you've ever done in your life, but get to a place where people know what you're going through. And you may decide you're not an alcoholic. You may decide that you're not an addict, or you don't have an eating disorder, but get to a place where people who have asked those questions to themselves and are doing it in a really loving and honest and non-judgmental way, and just get there. And if you can, when you get there, just say to someone in the room, this is my first time here and I have no idea what's going on, and see what happens. And just see what happens. That's what I would say. Get to a meeting, get to a place. For me, get to a place where you're not contending with your anger or your frustrations or your shame or your guilt just in your head. Get to a place where you're not holding it within. Get to a place where people who know what's going on can meet you there. And for me, that was the beginning of liberation, to realize, oh, what I'm experiencing is something that lots of other people experience. It's not I mean, it's a big deal in a sense that, it's a big deal, but it's not that big. Welcome to being human. There's no shame in being an alcoholic. Get to a place. So that's what I would say. Or look me up, look me up on this Godcast. Email Father Alex or just Google me and reach out to me, and I'll help you get connected. I really will. It's my joy. It'd be my joy and privilege to do that.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks, Trey. And where people might not recognize the face, they might recognize the voice. You're a regular feature on Radio 2 with Zoe Ball, and I've had numerous people on. Matt Woodcock's been on, who does Radio 2, and Paul Carenza was on last week with us. So just tell us about the joy of that little ministry going on there, Trey.
Well, what a joy it is to be invited. I'm on sort of a few months a year. So the 7:15 Pause for Thought. And for those who don't listen to Radio 2, you should. It's great radio station. Pause for Thought is just a sort of a 2 or 3 minute reflection on spirituality or faith. It's people of all different faiths, all different spiritualities. It's wonderful. I love it. I mean, it's what a gift to be able to get on the airwaves and to reflect on big stuff like God or spirituality, and to do that from a place of, in my own experience. I love it. I love it. I mean, I'm an evangelist, so of course I'm going to love talking about God, but I love doing it. I think there are lots of people in this nation, in these nations, who don't identify as people who would tick the religious box on the census, who may identify as no religion. But people, my belief, Alex, is that human beings are spiritual people. And we talk about that in different ways. And I believe deeply that God, I say this as a Christian, God is active in the life of every human being. God is moving and active and breathing in the life of every human being. And that people talk about that in different ways. But that is just I wouldn't put that belief on anybody else, but I believe that deeply. So I feel like when I'm talking on the radio, I think it's 8 million people who tune into the morning show, not all listening to me, of course, but, listening to the show. They had Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal on this week. Those are the people tune on to, not to me. But, if I'm speaking to these 8 million people across Europe, or the people that are listening, one of my core beliefs is God is already moving in them. They are already there because they're human beings, because we're human beings. Beautiful things are happening. And so I feel just so, again, lucky and fortunate to be able to invite people into the conversation about what that might feel like, whatever their religion is. It's real. Zoe's great too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, ever since I got my dog collar in 2015, people want to talk about God. And they might not want to agree with me. They might not hold the same theology. They might have all sorts of questions, but they all want a conversation, even when I don't want to sometimes, and it's kind of, okay, it's out there. And then,
well, that's what's so, go ahead.
Go.
That's what's so cool. That's what's so cool about your Godcast, is that you have people, celebrities and sports folks and people of all different kinds of walks in life who come on to do just that. People like to talk about God, because God is interesting. They may not even call it God, but so this whole podcast is your observation that that's how people are, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I have a rule where everybody's welcome, because everybody is a son or daughter of God, and they're welcome at the Godcast. So get in touch if you'd like to take part. But finally, Trey, you got the podcast Hope and Anchor podcast, which you were kind enough to invite me on a year or two ago. And how's that going? You got plans for more coming up, or?
Yeah, we've done 3 series now. We did a series in lockdown on Facebook, which was a video series. So Hope and Anchor is a podcast really about conversations with people across spiritual difference about the spirituality running through everything. So I co-host it as a Christian with my friend Jazz Ampalfar, who's an amazing speaker, who's not a churchgoer, doesn't identify that way, and so she's an unaffiliated person, someone who doesn't tick that box in the census. And so we sort of share conversation with people who are doing interesting things, who are, I think, interested in spirituality, from a British Lebanese comic to a winner of the Bake Off, to all kinds of people. And it's great. So we've done 3 series, and we're starting this spring with the next series, which will not be a series, but we're going to move to dropping it, sort of like we've learned from you, Alex. We're going to be dropping every week, so there'll be something dropped every week, so we can sort of hopefully build the engagement, particularly with people who aren't interested in religion but might be open to the spiritual conversation.
Fabulous. Well, Trey, I've loved this 40 minutes or so chatting to you. You know, a Christian there who's got some real stories and some humanity, and like Trey says, reach out to him or reach out to me if we can assist you with anything. But for now, Trey, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks, Alex.